Hi again. Today I'd like to venture away from bassoon breeds and talk about the contoured plywood bassoon case that I recently built. I made it to replace the rectangular plywood case that came with the Contra. I found that case heavy, cumbersome, and not providing adequate protection due to poor blocking. The new case has 5/16" sides of layered plywood with a top and bottom of 1/8" plywood. It is covered in black pebble grain Tolex and has a velvet lining. The blocking is fitted to this particular Molinara Contra and provides minimal movement protection. It weighs about 5 pounds less than the original case. Inside there are provisions for 2 bocals and a pocket for reed, glasses, and assorted whatnot. Outside there's a carrying handle and provisions for a shoulder strap. My plan was to make a contoured box with parallel top and bottom sides that will enclose the Contra. I will then cut it apart to make the bottom and lid sections. I laid the Contra on a piece of cardboard into its approximate encase orientation so that I could, using a square, project its outline onto the cardboard. I added about a 1/2 inch to the outline to create an estimate of the internal dimensions of the case. I also added some space for an accessory pocket. I chose to orient the Contra with bell down so that the bocals could be easily stored in the case bottom. Once the outline was established, I made some forms on which to bend the case sides. In this case, I used scraps of 2x12 to make the forms. 2 form pieces indexed together were adequate. This is the form for the lower bow and bell areas. The curved sides I used 2 layers of 4mm 3-ply bending plywood accurately cut to have parallel edges and to have uniform width. Bending plywood is very flexible in one direction, but when laminated with another layer forms a rigid structure. When gluing the curved sides, work on a flat surface, use lots of clamps, stagger the ends of the layers, and make sure the sides are everywhere perpendicular to the flat surface. Here is the bottom bow area, and here is the top bow area. I then joined the curved sections with 2 layers of 4mm ordinary plywood, also accurately cut to width, parallelism, and length. I then did another clearance check. Once the sides were complete, I glued and nailed the bottom onto the sides. The top was then similarly attached and both pieces flush trimmed to size and the edge rounded over. I then used a large bandsaw to separate the lid. I drew the cut line on the box and used both a fence and featherboard to help make the cut accurate. Since I had access to a surface sander, I used it to fine-tune the parallelism of the cut to the box bottom. The last woodworking step was to cut a rabbet on the edge of the bottom to make a nice joint for the case. I did this with a trim router using its edge guides to help keep things aligned. To support the Contra in the case, I built foam blocks. Each is 2 layers of rigid foam insulation shaped using a wood rasp and sanding drums. After the blocks were correctly shaped, I added a layer of thin plywood to each side and trimmed it to match the foam using a flush trim bit and a router. The blocks are topped with a layer of foam tape, truck to camper seal. A piece of wood is added to each end of the block so that it can be screwed into the case sides. When working with insulation foam, use wood glue. Other glues may have solvents that can attack the foam. I used carpet padding at the upper and lower Contra bows. That padding can be obtained from a carpet store as discarded scraps from an installation. The other padding that I use is foam, typically used in packing items like dishes. It is quite thin but can be layered to suit various purposes. Here are the 3 foam pads for the case bottom. They were covered in velvet and installed into the case bottom. Also shown are the 2 bow pads and the accessory pocket. The next step was to cover the case bottom in Tolex. Single pieces were used to cover the large flat sides and the side with the hinges. A single piece then was used to cover each of the curved sides. The rabbeted edge needs extra care and needs to be glued separately with a wooden form holding the Tolex tight into the rabbet. Here is the Contra in the case bottom. The bottom is fully lined with velvet and is fully covered outside with Tolex. All 4 hinges and 2 of the latches are installed. The other latch and the handle will be installed once the balance point of the case is established. With the case bottom complete, I turned my attention to the case lid. I made 3 additional foam blocks formed to keep the Contra firmly in place. The lid was trimmed and then fine-tuned with the surface sander to appropriate height. The edge was beveled using a 22.5-degree chamfer bit in the router. As with the case bottom, the router was held steady using its edge guide. The lid was then lined and covered in the same manner as the case bottom. The joints in the Tolex covering were covered with tape. I used 1-inch hockey stick tape. I used masking tape to help with the alignment of the tape. While the tape is self-adhesive, it is best to enhance that with stronger glue. Hinges and latches were then attached in the usual manner. As previously mentioned, I waited to install the final latch and the case handle until I determined the balance point of the case. I placed the case, fully loaded with the contra and accessories, on a stick until it balanced. The handle was then mounted directly above that location using T-nuts on the inside of the case. The shoulder strap mounting rings were similarly mounted. I haven't decided about backpack-type straps at this time. This was quite an adventure for me, and I'm happy with the results.